Yeah, so what I would start talking about today are what are called tile maps. And to start, let me just make um, just a blank project here, and then we'll look at a different one here in a moment. Okay, so if you go under the scene thing, then you have a couple of things in there that are going to be relevant. One of which we've already used, which was the background image. Okay, so we used the background image in our space shooter, and right, okay, great, nothing too fancy. But the background image, you're pretty limited in terms of how detailed it can be. It can only be basically a 160 by 120 image, and again, it's limited to the same color palette the same 16 colors for the color palette that you have for basically anything. Okay, so it's really limited in what you can do. So if we take, let me take an example of, okay, let's just go to the original Mario, okay, just for sake of demonstration. And let me fast forward it. Okay, so you guys have all seen this before, right? Okay, so what's going on here in terms of uh, graphics? So you've got some of these pipes and um, and other things, okay, and the enemies, and of course you've got Mario. Each of those things, each of these blocks that you're interacting with, uh, or the star, or Mario himself, or things like that, those are all sprites, okay? Then all of the blocks that you're walking around on and most of what makes up the pipes, okay, are not actually sprites. They're also not background images. They're a third kind of thing called a tile map. And the way the NES was designed was to be able to do basically, in some sense, three layers worth of graphics. And so is MakeCode basically. Okay, so you can have a background image, you can have a tile map, which will be most of the bricks and stuff you see, and then you can also have uh, the sprites on the screen. Okay, now the Nintendo was limited in some sense in terms of the number of sprites that you could have at any given time. It was limited to being able to draw 64 of them to the screen at any given time, and there was the extra restriction that uh, you could not have more than 8 of them on a horizontal scan line. Okay, so, and I think I talked about what a scan line was last week. Did I? Did we talk about what scan lines were? Okay, must not have. Okay. Um, so I think sometimes I get confused with what I've talked about in here versus my other uh, sort of retro programming class. Um, okay, so if you had an old Nintendo like this, how many of you guys actually had played one of these when you were kids, like the real deal? No, okay. What did you play? What was it connected to? Well, TV, right? Well, what did the TV look like? Was it a big, fat, giant box that like you'd break your back if you tried to lift it? Yeah, okay. So a cathode ray tube, or old tube TV, as we say, how does that thing work? Like, how does it actually produce an image on the screen? No. So it was not a projector-like thing like one of these guys. Okay. I mean, that would be certainly a way to produce an image. And there were some TVs that did, but they were really expensive, and uh, you knew that what they had a distinctive look. Um, yeah, because that certainly would be one way to do it. You have a small screen that you project to make bigger, just like a regular projector. Okay. Right. There's no lens in a tube TV. Okay, that would do that kind of magnifying. Okay, so then if it's not that, then what? Well, how does a flat screen work? Like the thing that's sitting on my desk here. So there's an array of pixels, and it turns each pixel has three subunits in it, red, green, and blue, right? And by adjusting the proportions of red, green, and blue, I can produce not any color of light, but pretty much most of them, okay? And then how many are on this screen? Well, the particular screen in front of us is, um, let's see, I think this is a 1080p display, okay? So it's got 1080 or 1920 pixels wide by 1080 pixels tall, okay, which is a lot. Okay, the original Nintendo was essentially operating at like 320 by 200 or thereabouts. Okay, so much, much, much lower resolution. But yeah. Now, the TVs of the day, right, cathode ray tubes, so the way that they work is there's a basic, the reason it's so thick is because there's an electron gun, basically, that fires a beam of electrons. And then in the tube, there's some coiled magnets or electromagnets that if you adjust the properties of the magnetic field, you can actually bend the beam, okay, one way or the other, or up or down. And so that's what these magnets do is they bend the beam such that it scans across the screen, turning on and off as it does so. Um, and it scans across the screen kind of the way that you would read a book, right? Across a line, then back across the next line, then back across the next line, and so on. Okay, so each one of those lines where it's scanning is called a scan line. And the original Nintendo, the way the graphics hardware worked was that you could have no more than 8 sprites display on a single scan line. And if you tried to display more, then what would happen is you get this kind of weird flickery effect. Uh, if you play a game that really pushes the Nintendo like almost past its design limits, a good example of that would be some of the Mega Man games, where you can feel it slowing down because the Nintendo is just trying to process too much at once. And you'll also sometimes see that flickery business. Okay, now with MakeCode, there is no theoretical limit to the number of sprites or how many can be on a given scan line. Okay. That said, if you had 64 sprites on the screen, that would be way too many, right? That's just not like it can do it, but it's going to be slow as crap. Okay. Um, but there's no restriction on the scan line business, so you don't have to worry about that. Okay, so 64 sprites or 8 per scan line is relatively limiting. Okay, and I should point out, for example, here, how many sprites is Mario? He's actually two. It's a second one stacked on top. Yeah. So the sprites were 8 by 8 pixels. And so if you wanted to have a bigger object, you had to stack and put multiple sprites together to get what we call a meta sprite. Um, yeah. And so that's not as right, you can run out of sprites a lot faster than you might think. Okay, now sprites in MakeCode don't have that hard 8 by 8 limitation. Okay, which is nice, um, but the ones on the original Nintendo did have a limitation, and old school computers and video game consoles like this all had some sort of limitations. So, for example, my other class that's programming the Commodore 64, which is a computer from the same era as the original Nintendo, the sprites there were 20. Thank you, Siri. 24 by 21 pixels, which is kind of a weird non-square shape, but there was good reason for that number. Um, and there could only be 8 of them on the screen, period, much less worrying about scan lines. Okay, so the majority of what you see here in Mario, right, uh, we all of these bricks and stuff that's going on, or all these blocks that you have to jump around, right? These can't be all sprites, because if they were, we'd be using way too many of them, either period or on a particular scan line. Okay, so there's got to be a different way to do it, and this was handled with what are called tile maps. Okay, so when you see this mapping of things, what it's not doing is treating it as a gigantic image. Okay, and the reason is this block right here and this block right here, aren't they basically the same thing? So if I stored this as an image, I'd be storing basically 2 separate copies of the same thing. Or in this particular scene, actually, what, like 15 separate copies of the same thing? Does that seem like a good idea? No, that's a monumentally bad idea when you're on a very memory limited platform like the Nintendo. Okay, so what they used instead was he said, okay, I'm going to define a tile or a bunch of tiles that have particular art attached to them. And then right here, I could say, I want a tile number 1. And then here, I want another tile number 1. And here, another tile number 1, and so on. And then I only have to actually store 1 copy of the art that goes with the tile and some sort of note that just says, okay, a tile number 1 is in this location. Takes way less memory to do that. Okay. Um, Okay, so then the graphics hardware in the Nintendo is capable of scrolling these tile maps in and out of view, along with the background, if there is any, and along with the sprites. Okay, so for example, in the underground worlds, the background is just solid black here. In the overground worlds, let me scroll back here, it's not. Um, and you had to do all sorts of tricks on the Nintendo. So, for example, if you guys ever noticed that the bushes and the clouds are actually the same piece of art, the only thing that's different is the color that's attached to them, right? So it's the same art, but it switches the color palette. And the Nintendo had the ability to use different color palettes for different objects. MakeCode, we don't have that ability. We only get the same 16 colors for everything. Okay, whatever. And so, yeah, the same pieces of art that are making up the cloud are also used to make up these bushes with just uh, different color palettes attached to them. It's kind of clever, right? We still do this today, by the way. Has anybody ever noticed the poop emoji and the vanilla ice cream emoji are actually, other than the ice cream cone part, but the actual swirly bit for the ice cream and the swirly bit for the poop are the same thing? It's just a difference of colors. Yeah, now why we have to have a poop emoji, it's kind of ridiculous. But hey, we do. Okay. Uh, So, how do we actually make a tile map? Well, okay, set tile map to tile map blah. Okay, so let's put one of these in here. Okay, and then right now I don't have anything. So, what I have is I can make my tile map whatever dimensions I want. Okay, and these are in sort of blocks. Okay, and then the tiles, you can create your own tiles or you can use ones that are built in here. Okay, so let me just, for sake of example, use something like this. Okay, and so I'm just painting sort of a random, doesn't really matter what it is. Um, something like this, and then, okay, let's maybe put some plants on top of one of them. Okay, great. All right, so this is my tile map, and obviously, like I said, I can adjust the size of it. And let's say I make it 32 by whatever, then it's wider, okay? Obviously, well, not necessarily obviously, but if you want to do something like Mario, where you have a tile map where way more of it exists than what's on screen at a given moment, then you need a larger tile map. And they can, with some, they can't be like a billion by a billion, but they can be kind of whatever size you want them to be. You would use a smaller tile map if, for example, like let's take the Zelda games. In the first Zelda, there's the place where you go into the cave, and it's like the old dude is like, "Hey, it's dangerous out there. Take this." Right, where it's just you're not going to move within this world. It's just a very small thing. Well, then you could just use a tile map that's basically the size of the screen. Again, that'd be sufficient. Okay, so what you're doing here is basically just saying, all right, at this location in my tile map, I want to put this tile there. And then the tile is a piece of art that you can create separately. Okay. Um, and then the background of it, that right now is just sort of gray and white checkerboard, will get replaced with the background image that you select, if any, and it'll layer that in. Okay, so the background image will always be at the back, then your tile map and your sprites will appear. Okay, so it makes sense? And you basically just kind of paint this thing using your palette of stuff here. And right now I've got it in gallery mode, so I'm just using the stuff predefined. But of course, you can also create your own tiles or modify existing tiles to make new variants of them. Okay, um, so good. Now I've got this thing, and if I set this as my tile map, so let me just hit, and it's hard to see there, but like a little miniature version of it is in the grid. If I go and I play my game, then what do I see here? Okay, I see one little piece of that tile map, but some of the tile map's off the screen. Okay, now I can't move because I haven't defined a player or any sort of movement. Okay, and so I'm sort of stuck here in terms of how the tile map is going to work. Okay. Um, and that's because I haven't done anything with the not there, where is it, the camera, right? I haven't defined a sprite, and I also haven't specified any sort of object to be the player, okay? All right, now let me edit this tile map again because there's one other thing that I want to be able to do. So this button right here, okay, that looks like sort of a brick wall. If I select that and then paint over a sprite, or sorry, a tile, you see how it kind of gives it that pink tint? Okay, it's not actually going to look like that in the game with that pinkish tint. What the pinkish tint does, though, is it represents visually to you what's going to be different about these that have a pink tint versus those that don't. What makes sense? Yeah. They'll be, yeah. So the ones that have the pink tints, you can't go through. The collision gets applied. Okay. And the ones that do not have the pink tint, you can go through. Okay. So this is how you can kind of get a fourth layer out of this, is by having things that are and are not blocking. So, for example, here with my sort of green, like grass stuff with the little plants, I probably want the grass to be solid so that I wouldn't fall through it. But the little bushes that I put there, I would not make those solid so that I can just walk right on through them. Okay. Now, the sprite would be layered on top of them, which would give sort of an illusion of some depth and look cool. At least I would hope it would look cool. Yeah, okay. So the pink stuff basically is how you control whether or not it's going to be a solid or non-solid block. Okay, good news. Is that static? Like once you paint a block pink, does it have to stay as a solid block forever until the end of time? I mean, I'm asking the question so that kind of the law of pedagogical predictability means that the answer is no, of course not. Okay, so you can, during the program, turn on or off the solidity of a given tile on a per tile basis anytime you want. Okay, now why might you want to do that? Why might you want to be able to turn off the solidity of a tile? Yeah, doors, things like that, right? That could be, or something that could be active at one moment but not active at another. Okay. On the subject, you can also change the art that goes at a particular tile location. Okay, so for example, if you made a door, you could make two versions of the tiles, one that looks closed and one that looks open. And when you switch the art from one to the other, you also switch whether or not it's solid or not. And then it looks like you ought to be able to walk through it, and the player's going to be like, oh, okay, it's open now, and off you go, right? So you have the ability to do that. Now, how do you know which tile you're accessing? The tiles are on a grid, okay? So down here at the bottom, I have defined it. It may be a little hard to see on the projector, but I have defined this to be a grid of 32 tiles by 16 tiles, okay? And then you see my mouse cursor is in some position. It's where the little pink highlighter thing is because I've still got the wall tool open. Right next to it, it says 11, 10. That is the coordinates of the tile that my mouse cursor is over, okay? So when you do this, if you said, I want to turn the tile at spot number whatever to be solid or not, that's how you know where it is by its row and column number. Okay, and the tile map editor will let you easily see that. Okay, so you don't have to like count or whatever. You can just put it over where you want and then see what the coordinates are. Okay, does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, so the tiles are all, if you look at them, so let's actually open up one of these things. Okay, so if I go to assets, then I can see I've got my tile map, but I can also create a tile, okay? And then this gives me my usual 16 color palette along with a grid and how big is each tile capable of being. So what's the coordinates down there? So it's actually 16 by 16 because this guy is 0, 0 rather than 1, 1. Okay, just to keep us all on our toes. Right, so your tiles can be 16 by 16 pixels. On the original Nintendo, I think they were 8 by 8 also, but I'd have to go back and double check that. Okay, so yeah, 16 by 16, and the way that these are encoded is basically glorified paint by numbers. So for each of these blocks, or spots, all I'm going to write down is which of the 16 colors I'm putting there. Where one of the colors is the absence of color, so that I can get stuff that's got a little bit of transparency to it. Okay, so that takes up a lot less space than actually storing images, which is why you can't just copy and paste graphics like that you Photoshop into this, because you've got to limit it to the color palette. Okay, so right, so you can make as many of these as you want and call them whatever you want, and then it has a bunch of them built in. So if we go to the gallery, okay, all the ones up here at the top are meant to be sprites. Okay, but if you scroll down quite a bit, there's a bunch of things that are meant to be tile maps tiles. Eventually we'll get there. Yeah, here we go. And these all have the little like tile icon next to them. So you know that they're meant to be used as tiles rather than as sprites or backgrounds or, yeah, whatever. So the sort of default here is sprites don't have any icon next to them. Backgrounds have this like exclamation mark type thing going on, and then tiles have the little tile icon. Okay, so looking at the ones that are built in, essentially it's got stuff for doing kind of like um, uh, Zelda-y kind of games, or some of these ones in the beginning kind of remind me maybe of like the Pokemon games where you're walking around in like a town or something. Uh, before you go fight something or whatever. Um, Mario-esque with some of like the bushes and things that we talked about. You've got these guys here, which you can use in dungeons for like buttons that you step on and stuff to activate doors. You got some treasure chests, whether or not they're open or closed. You've got some like stair type looking things or pits of death. Um, various stuff like that. And then let's just keep going in here. Some bushes, and then uh, yeah, other stuff, and then we're getting back into um, sprites that can have animation, which we'll talk about later. Okay. Okay, so those are the ones that are built in, but basically it's stuff for making like Mario-esque games, Zelda-esque games, things kind of in that vein. Okay. Um, Okay, good. So that's how a tile map works. And then in terms of the scrolling, obviously the whole tile map can't be on the screen at any given time. And in fact, well, how much of it can be on the screen at any given time? What was the dimensions of our screen again? For the entire viewing window, uh, each tile is 16 by 16, but how many pixels is the screen itself? You guys remember? 160 wide, 120 tall. Okay, so how many tiles is that? 160 divided by 16, and if you're reaching for your calculator, I'm going to come over there and hit you. Yeah, it's 10 wide, right? By how many tall? Uh, well, if each one's 16, it's 160 pixels wide. That's 10 tiles. 160, 116, or sorry, 160 divided by 16 is 10 last time I checked. All right, how many wide? Or tall, sorry. If it's 120 pixels, uh, that exactly. It's not a whole number. 128 would be a whole number. So it's basically what, seven and a half? Yeah, because 128 would be eight of them on the nose. So it's only seven and a half of them. Well, that's annoying, but c'est la vie. Okay. So your tile map is significantly larger, obviously, than the screen itself. Okay. So let's get a sprite in here and let's actually get something where I can control it. All right, so let me just pick a sprite here, and I'm just going to choose something at random. Let me choose the little dude. Okay, so I'm going to make a sprite of kind player. Okay, and then I need to make it so that I can move him around. And so I'll just use my sprite move with buttons. Okay, now if I play this, what happens? Yeah, he moves off screen and stuff isn't scrolling. Okay, and the reason for that is because under scene, uh, I need to attach the camera to the sprite. Okay, so that not only am I moving him around, but I'm moving him such that the camera stays attached to the object. Okay, And so now I'm moving around, and you see I can't move through these blocks because I painted them pink with the little wall stuff. Okay. Um, but I can move through these, including the bushes. Okay, so I mean, we've just started making a side scroller. Now, what's sort of the obvious problems that I have here? Yeah, there's no gravity, okay, and but my art looks side on rather than top down, okay. You can do your art either way. If it's top down, then obviously you don't want to have gravity, okay, and most of your blocks are going to be not solid. Okay. So, like, for example, let's say you make like a city street. The street is going to be non-solid in a top-down view. In a side-scroller view, you'd want to have most stuff solid so you wouldn't fall through it. Okay. So right now I don't have any gravity. Okay. I also don't have any ability to jump or anything like that. Okay. So let me get in the gravity. Okay. So how do I get gravity in here? Well, what is gravity really? Yeah, it's an acceleration that happens because of mass, right? And so there is between any two objects that have mass, there is a force between them, and the quantity of that force is dictated basically by the distance between them and what the masses of the two objects are. Okay, great. For the purposes of a game or us talking about gravity here on the surface of this very nice planet, we can treat the Earth as if it's such a gigantic object that it doesn't move. It's just a thing that just sits there. Okay. And any other object that's relatively small in comparison, so, me compared to the mass of the Earth, right? I mean, I know I'm not as thin as I used to be, but not any comparison, right? Okay, so that there's a force that the Earth is exerting on me, pulling me towards it, and I'm exerting a much smaller force, pulling the Earth up towards me. Um, what's the relationship between the force and acceleration? Mass times acceleration, okay? And so the acceleration is the constant part, right? So the acceleration due to gravity, uh, for me pulling on the Earth versus the Earth pulling on me, the A part, the acceleration, is the same. It's 9.8, right? And it's negative in one case and positive in the other because of the directions. But basically, it's 9.8 meters per second squared. Okay. Well, what about the masses? A lot different. Okay. And we can sort of neglect the masses for the sake of this. Um, and so if I want to set gravity in my game, what I need to do is say that my sprite, okay, so I'll use set my sprite, I'll put it here, not x, but its acceleration. Okay, so for a given sprite, you have the option to set a bunch of its properties. Okay, x and y are its positions on the screen, vx and vy are its velocities, ax and ay are its accelerations, and then you actually can also set the friction and the scaling factor. So um, you can make a sprite sort of like gigantic by taking a small one and just blowing it up. Um, Old school hardware could do this, by the way. So that's sort of a realistic thing. Uh, but in particular for physics, right? What are the differences between all these? So what's the difference between x and y, vx, vy, ax, and ay? Right? What's the relationship there? Yeah, and so it's going to be the component of either velocity or acceleration or position that's in the x direction or the y direction. Okay, and so then uh, what's the difference between the position, the velocity, and the acceleration? Well, what is velocity? It's a change in position. And what is acceleration? It's a change in velocity. Okay, so we've all taken calculus, yes, or physics? No, you're in calculus though, right? Okay, so yeah, so you study a lot of the relationship between those two things, like in an equation-y kind of sense, right? Given a function that describes the position, what do you know the velocity is, and so on. Okay, now if we want to program some physics stuff, like for example, let's say that I wanted to make a um, what was that game? Crap, it was a 2D game. Um, and you basically had like tanks and you could shoot, well, on the phone. Oh, Lord child, no, I'm thinking like back when phones were things that were attached to walls. Okay, when you had to like crank them and call the operator and then, say I'd like you to Pennsylvania 65000, and then they'd connect you. Yeah, okay. But what they're doing, right, is remaking an old classic from the old days, right? So, and you had different weapons and stuff that you could use, but what you had to do was you had to choose an angle of inclination and an initial velocity, okay, for your that you fired your thing. And then once you did that and you fired it, it modeled the parabolic arc that your weapon would travel. And if you got good at it, then you could like really nail people. But if you sucked, then you would like blow yourself up because you didn't do the physics in your head right. Okay, so if we wanted to program something like that, we would have to do a little bit of physics, like math computations on paper, in order to figure out what the appropriate equations are to get the motion to look right. Okay, totally possible to do those computations. They're really not that hard. Okay, but in terms of gravity, ax and ay. Okay, what do we want if I want my player to fall down? Okay, positive 9.8. Now, why positive? The coordinate system. What's the coordinate system? Where is 0, 0 on the screen? Top left. Where is the positive x-axis? Which way does it point? To the right, okay, as you would expect. Where is the positive y-axis? It points down, not up. Okay, so because of that, what do we have to do with our acceleration in the y direction? It needs to be positive something rather than negative something. Okay, now 9.8 though is not necessarily the number that we want. That's the number in metric units, assuming that distances are measured in meters. They're not here, right? They're measured in pixels, right? Um, so we just have to pick a number, and let's just actually see what negative 9.8, or well, here I'll just call it 10 for sake of demonstration. Probably want it a little faster. Okay. Although this could be kind of cool if you were making like a you're in space, right, or something like that. Okay, now maybe it's still a little too low. But yeah, so in terms of tuning this, right, you just have to kind of right play with it until you get it to be about what you want, right? Um, okay, so right, so this is why it's got to be a positive number because we want it going down. And then in terms of how big that number should be, well, you just have to play with that and get it to be about to feel right. Okay, does that make sense? We um, and now I set the y coordinate of the acceleration. I did not set the x coordinate of the acceleration, and in this case, why did I do that or not do that? Yeah, gravity is only one direction in this particular um, thing, but that's certainly not the only acceleration that could be applied to an object. right? So if I made like a rocket ship or something, then I could have acceleration going in horizontally also. That wouldn't be due to gravity, but it would be an acceleration. Okay, so now one thing that this means here is I set the acceleration for my sprite to be a particular number. I would have to set the acceleration for all sprites individually to this same number, right? So let's say that I have an enemy walking around. Well, I would presumably want that enemy to also have gravity associated with it, right? I would have to set its acceleration to also that number. Okay, so what this means actually is that some sprites can have gravity and others don't. Or some sprites can have one gravity and others can have a different gravity, which is a little weird, but could make for something kind of cool. Why might you want to have your player have gravity but not an enemy? Right? What would be an example where that might make sense? Yeah, like let's say you have a ghost or something, right, that can float. Okay. Um, and if you wanted to make it really bizarre, you could make it so that some enemies have different gravity than others. That'd be really weird, but you could do it. Okay. Um, and I think, as I mentioned, the gravity can be changed on a per sprite basis. So we could presumably have a side scroller where you're on Earth for part of the time and then you go to a level that's on the moon and the gravity changes. Could totally do that. You just, when you load the moon graphics, change the gravity to a lower value. Okay. Um, the one other thing that's in here that we haven't used is friction. And if you set that, then you can make it look like you're walking on ice, where when you let off the controller, you'll still kind of skid to a halt by adjusting the friction number. Um, so you can do icy kind of stuff with that. Okay, good. All right, so here I fell to the very bottom, okay, and so your tile map does have sort of a fundamental limit in either direction. Uh, and if you hit the bottom of the tile map, there's nothing to go below, and so you're stuck there, even though I haven't put a wall object. Now, if I were making this like a Mario type game, what should I probably do? Yeah, but I would need to do some extra stuff to make that happen. Like either putting like a check, like, hey, if my y coordinate ever is above blah, that means I'm in a pit of death, kill me, right? That sort of stuff. Okay. All right. So does that make sense? Okay. All the stuff for tile maps is under scene, by the way. And here you can set the tile map to a thing. And we can also check whether or not we're overlapping with a given type of tile. So for example, let me go back into my tile map and edit it a little bit. So let's edit this one. Okay, and let me go in and add, oops. I'll put this little crystal there. Okay, whatever. And then I'll do something where I could say under scene, on sprite of kind player overlaps this particular type of object. Um, let me just say something. Okay, nothing special. Okay, so now when I overlap it, then I can detect that I've overlapped that particular type of object. Okay. Now there's another piece here. You see the location thing. That will give you the coordinates of the particular tile that you've overlapped. And the reason you want to be able to do that is like, so let's pretend that this crystal or whatever is like a teleporter, and I want it to teleport me to some other location. Well, I need to know which one I touch to know which place to teleport me to, right? So I could say, okay, if the location was this one, then teleport the player over here. Otherwise, teleport them over there or something like that. Okay, right. And then you pick the art here. So notice that the overlap thing, doesn't this kind of look like the overlap that we had with the space shooter, where two things could overlap, two sprites could overlap? Okay, and also you can have sprites of kind. The kind can be anything. So you could make it, for example, that when uh, an enemy runs into something, it dies. But when the player runs into it, it only takes a point of damage or some, I don't know, right? What why you might want to do that, but you could, right? Or you could make it so that, like, let's say you had lava in your tile map. Well, maybe like in Mario, some of your enemies are immune to lava and others aren't. You could then say, all right, if it's a type, you could make a type of enemy that's like lava immune and another type that's not, and then do this overlap thing for the lava non-immune ones. Okay. Okay, so does that kind of make sense? Okay, so we've got the real basics here to a side scroller type game. We put in gravity. Uh, we've talked about the tile map stuff. Okay, and so now, kind of, where do you want to go with this? Well, let's go back to make code. Okay, and there's a one of the other skill map games um, that I want you guys to go through, which is to basically make a platformer with this silly monkey. Okay. Um, okay. Now, looking at the kind of preview here of it, um, what you'll do basically is, well, it'll start kind of like what we've already done, which is we need a tile map. Okay, that's going to have tiles in it. Now, there's also a background in this particular uh, case, which is not scrolling, but it could. Okay, we also have sprites, namely our monkey, and then there's other sprites that you'll add in, like bananas and stuff later. Okay, but what do you notice about the monkey as he's moving around? Yeah, he's got an animation to it. Okay, so that's something that we haven't actually added yet. Um, Although we could, or actually, did you guys add the do the animation that with the space shooter, where you made the like flames that are coming out the back of the rocket look a little different? Yeah. So how did we do that? Okay, so how do I animate a sprite? I basically just have to have an individual frame for each, or piece of art for each frame of its animation. And then the animator plugin basically just switches between those images relatively quickly to make it look as if it's an animated object. Okay. And you can have, theoretically as many frames as you want. Okay. Um, but there's one other thing here that we didn't do in the space shooter. Namely, you see that the animation switches if you hit the left or the right, right? So what happens if the monkey is going to the right versus the left? It's mirrored, right? So we would have to either code the art, make the art to have both versions facing left or facing right, or have some sort of code that handles mirroring. Okay. And the original 8-bit Nintendo actually could do that on a hardware basis. You didn't have to store both versions of the art for left facing and right facing. You could just say, use the right facing art, but mirror it this way, and that all that took was a single bit, and you got basically two for the price of one. Okay. Um, on here, you actually store the art separately, which is technically space inefficient, but do we care about space nowadays? I don't know. I mean, unless you're downloading like uh, Modern Warfare, right? How big is that? 250 gigabytes, huh? Like it's your entire PlayStation's data. Which do you have a PS4, PS5? PS you're not cool enough to have a PS5. Although apparently, like you actually can get Xbox Series X's now. Yeah, like you can actually find them and not have to like find a dude in an alleyway that like opens up his trench coat kind of thing. Like from retail establishments at MSRP. Yeah, it is. And graphics cards are really starting to come down, A, and B, you can find them and they don't sell out in 2 nanoseconds. Oh, stupid crypto. Oh God. Crypto? Well, okay, let me give you guys a hint about what I think about crypto. How many of you guys watch the Super Bowl? Right? How many of you guys watch the Super Bowl ads? Right, those are obviously the best part, no matter how good the football game is. Okay, so all the crypto ads for that, or let's maybe take last year's Super Bowl where they had the Matt Damon commercial. Yeah? How do you think they paid Matt Damon for that? They surely paid him, right? Okay, if they didn't pay him in crypto, that tells you everything you need to know about crypto, right? Yeah, I think crypto and especially NFTs, oh my God, right, are a like demonstration of the greater fool theory, right? Basically, what you're trying to do is to convince somebody stupider than you to pay you money for something, right? And or in this case, crypto, so that they can get like a digital certificate of a stupid ape smoking a cigar or whatever it is, right? Like, yeah, that is just the dumbest thing ever. People have made a lot of money for it, so hey, great. But, what are most of them doing? Are they keeping those assets in crypto or are they liquidating them into US dollars or some other currency? Well, I don't know about you, but yeah. Now that said, I mean, uh, when Bitcoin was first became a thing in like the late 2000s, I was in graduate school and I actually did quite a bit of research on it. And I was like, yeah, I could set up rigs to mine this stuff. I know how to build the computers to do it. Not that hard. Um, and then I calculated what the electricity would cost me and what the value of it was, and I was like, yeah, this could really go up in value. It could also fizzle out and become nothing tomorrow. I'm a graduate student who's worrying about my dissertation. I don't have time to be doing this sort of thing. I also didn't have a whole lot of money, so I said this is stupid and moved on. Well, if I had set up a couple of mining rigs back then, well, let's just say I wouldn't be teaching right now, right? I would have I probably would have, I wouldn't have retired. I would have never gone into the workforce in the first place, right? But I could have just as easily been wrong, and then I wouldn't have been able to meet you guys, and that would have been a sad universe. Yeah. Um, Actually, no. If I struck it rich, I would still keep teaching because I'd get bored otherwise. Now, I might not teach 3 classes a semester. I might only teach like one or two. Um, I would also never fly coach again. Um, a Tesla. Well, I'm hoping that a Tesla will be in my future within the next 5 years. Well, there's that, but um, yeah. So no, the object number one is get my house paid off, and then I will consider a Tesla. But I mean, unless somebody really wants an A, in which case, uh, you have one out front of the mall with a bow on top. There's your A. Right now, not really, of course. That would be illegal. Um, yeah. Okay. So basically, what I'd like you guys to do is to go through the monkey platformer project the same way that we did with the space shooter one. Okay. Um, the salient points about this we've already hit. Okay. And then what's sort of the assignment really is after you've gone through it, then what? Well, what do we do with the space shooter? You finish the space shooter, and then I said, add something, right? We'll do the same thing here, right? So go through the space shooter, okay? Or not space shooter, the monkey game, okay? And when you're finished, then add something, okay? Now, there's one thing I want to point out about the monkey game that um, you're going to want to use in other games, but you can't. Um, okay, so let me go to the finished product from the second one, just for sake of demonstration. Okay, so which is I want my monkey to be able to jump. Okay, so when I hit the up arrow, he jumps. Okay, what happens if I mash the up arrow? I still fall back down, and he'll only jump if I'm touching the ground. That makes sense, right? I mean, unless you were trying to do like a double jump, some games have that where you can jump once when you're in the air, but that's it, right? It's not here. Okay, so in this particular tutorial, it has this thing called gravity jump. And I've got this tied to the up button being pressed. Okay, so what does gravity jump do? Well, it just makes me jump. Okay, so from a physics perspective, what is jumping? The instant I jump, what am I doing? I'm setting my velocity in the y direction to be something. Okay, let's say negative something because I want to go up. Okay, and then why is it that I slow down as I'm going up and then I come back down? Because gravity is still pulling on me, right? Okay, so I could change this to set the velocity, okay, but watch the difference here in terms of effect. Oh, it's not big enough. Yeah, let's try that. Um, why is that not working? Oh, derp. What should it be? Negative, because the coordinate system. Okay, so obviously that's too small of a number, so let me do negative 500 like I had it. And let's see how that looks. Okay, that was probably a little bit too much. All right, so let me try negative like 250. Okay, that seemed reasonable. Okay, here's the problem with the way I've coded here. What happens if I mash the button? Yeah, I can keep, jumping indefinitely. Okay. Yeah, so this would be perfect if you were making Flappy Bird. Okay, but not what we would want um, for this kind of thing. So the problem is that I've got the thing tied to activate the jump anytime I hit the up button. But do I want that? No, I want it to hit only when I've hit the up button and I'm not already jumping. Or if I wanted to do something like a double jump, then I'd have to be a little bit more complicated. Okay, so the gravity jump function that's built into this tutorial basically handles disallowing you from doing a double jump or mashing the jump button. Okay, um, but the gravity jump thing is under the sprites thing. All right, so let me go back to my um, here. Let me go back to my tile map demo. You know what's not here? The gravity jump thing, right? That was basically built into that tutorial only, and it's not accessible in any of the other projects, which is really annoying. Okay, I don't know why they would have done that and not made it that. Okay, now it's possible that what they wanted to do was to put it in an extension, okay, but I don't think it's there because um, none of these look like what they ought to be for that. Okay, so we're kind of hosed in that sense. That's possible. Let's look at it. I think though that that's stuff for doing. Well, maybe it is there. That would be great. Mm, nope. Yeah. Okay. So when you see controller here, um, those were basically designed, and same thing here with the encoder. Um, is Those are designed to be used with so you can get actual hardware that will be able that can run this stuff and that looks like little Game Boys or something, uh, and can interface with it. And some of those things that you can get have like servos and stuff in them or LEDs. So, like imagine like on your Nintendo Switches, right? Like if you tilt the thing, it knows that it's being tilted, or your phone even, right? Like, and so you have the ability to program games that take that into account. Um, that's what that stuff is meant for, not like just regular gamepad controllers and physics. Okay, so it's somewhat annoying that that's the case. All right, let me go into here. Um, yes, but what I would even better want to do would be, oops, let me go. That's not what I meant to do. I meant to let me take this and save the finished project to my projects because then we can go through and we can um, see now it has it, okay, which is really annoying that actually, let's go back to here because maybe it actually is there and maybe I'm just blind. No, so it should be under life cycle. Yeah, see, it's not there. So, okay, I guess we could do two things. If you want it, make a copy of the monkey thing and then delete all the monkey stuff, and then you can have it. The other possibility, and this is one reason I like uh, make code, is because I can go in here and I can look at um, a uh, I can take the exact same code that I programmed with the blocks and look at what its equivalent Python would be or JavaScript. And so I can see here that the gravity jump thing, I could probably just copy and paste this into any project I wanted into the Python part, and then it would work with the blocks, or at least hopefully. Okay, so what I really like though is let's say you program a bunch of stuff in blocks and you hit the Python button. What's it going to do? Show you the equivalent Python, and not 100%. But if you then program some stuff in Python and you go back to block mode, it'll translate back and forth for you. Okay, it's not perfect, particularly for complicated things, but for a lot of stuff, it handles it just fine, and that's really cool. And one reason that I picked this language for us to use in this class because What you guys here in about 2 weeks are going to run into is you're going to be like, block code is driving me crazy. It's a mess. It's impossible to keep track of what's where when I've got a complicated program, and nobody would ever actually do this in the real world. Well, guess what? All of those things are true, because in real programming, what are you doing? Right? A real language. Okay, now, a bunch of you are presumably going to take further courses in computer science. Who's going to take more CS next year? Okay. Well, which class are you going to take? It's almost registration season, so you're going to be meeting with your advisors. What are you going to sign up for next semester? CS 111. Okay. Which is intro programming in Python. Full stop. Okay. So that's the next thing. And uh, partly because of that, towards the later end of the class, we're going to look at all kind of some of the same stuff that we are doing in blocks, but in Python, and that will serve as kind of a bridge for those of you who are going to take further CS stuff later, which happens to be in Python, right? So there's sort of a method to the madness here. Um, okay, so kind of makes sense? Yeah? All right, so I'll post the assignment to Canvas, but basically it's the same thing. Go through the monkey tutorial um, and do everything there, and then add something cool to it and upload it to Canvas, right? So not rocket science. Good? Good? All right, and maybe we'll figure out where our compatriots were today.